Preparing. Is it going to work? Redirecting to the streaming page. We're over at YouTube and it says live now. It looks like it might be working. This is okay. We're there. Okay, I had to mute so that I didn't get it in my ears. I hope you guys didn't hear it. That's wonderful. So we're over at YouTube as well. So I'll put the chat there. This is so easy. Why use Restream if I can stream straight over that way? So this is beautiful. We're supposed to start in about 30 seconds or so. I might give some people time to join and file in before I get on to the questions. So today is a patron and supporter Q&A. So I want to thank all of you who have been patrons over on my new page at Patreon. And also, of course, people who have been longstanding supporters of my show over at my blog at don'tletitgo.com. I sent Zoom invites out to everybody because a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to give priority to the patrons and the show supporters when I'm looking at chat feedback. And the second reason is I just didn't know whether I was going to be able to live stream onto YouTube today. So I'm glad I'm able to do it. I'm glad I don't even need Restream to do this. I'm just streaming straight with Zoom over to YouTube. So I'm very, very excited about this, that the tech is a little bit easier. Now let's see. Oh, they're talking about features of YouTube over in the chat at Patreon. So again, thank you everyone who is a Patreon supporter of mine. You can become a Patreon supporter and then be one of the ones who's going to be able to submit questions for the next Q&A. So go over to my page on Patreon. If you're watching it live stream now, I'm not going to dump a link into the chat or anything. I'm going to go ahead and get into the questions today, but after, when this is done, it'll get posted to YouTube and I'll go ahead and put a link. You guys can just find me so easily. I'm the only Amy Peikoff in the world. So if you go to Patreon and then / Amy Peikoff, you'll find me and then you can become a patron as well. I also encourage you, if you guys are watching me live on YouTube right now, if you get value from the things that I'm doing on YouTube, please become a subscriber over on YouTube. On YouTube, there are certain capabilities that unlock when you reach 1,000 subscribers. So that's a huge goal of mine. And I'm over a third of the way there, well over, I think, a third of the way there to get over to the 1,000 subscriber mark at YouTube. YouTube is setting a high bar for being able to use certain features. One of the fun features that they have over there is called Super Chat. So somebody can be on a live broadcast like this and, put, $5 and then a question. And then that means that I can get $5 in my PayPal account if I answer that question. And it's just kind of fun. I've watched Dave Rubin use it. I'm seeing your own now start using it. I'm getting jealous. Like, come on, can I get enough subscribers over at YouTube? So go ahead and do that if you can. So like I said, I'm on Zoom today, and Zoom is exclusively, the invite is sent out exclusively to my patrons over at Patreon. I'm going to be watching that. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to be addressing questions that were submitted by those patrons. And also actually, I don't know if I have any questions that were submitted by my show supporters over at the blog. I think it's mostly just over at Patreon at the page over there. But I've got a few, and I'll also, jump into the chat and look either for follow-ups or for other questions. Someone over at YouTube is saying that Super Chat is geo-restricted. It is, yeah. And obviously, I'm in the United States. In the United States, we have it here. It's not a problem. But yeah, I'm sorry, you guys. I mean, it would be great. Obviously, the bigger the market, the better from my perspective. I'm all for free and open trade in this sort of scenario. Okay, so it's a few minutes after. I think everybody who wants to be watching live is probably here. I've got just over at the Zoom, just a couple people hanging out live. So maybe people are choosing more watching on YouTube. Here's some questions. Now, when I had my first patron Q&A last time, one of my patrons really took me seriously because I said, look, I'm just on the ground floor of this. I really need questions. And so this one patron, who is one of my buttered coffee level patrons, as I call them, sent me a whole list of questions. And then I went ahead and got through a few of them last time. And I gave really long answers last time. And so now I'm going to go ahead and address a few more that he has sent me for the, last time. I'm still catching up. And, thank you to this patron, this supporter, for sending me all these questions. They're interesting. And it also, like I said, I'm at this ground floor stage where I'm getting too few questions rather than too many. So here's one of them. He asks, what was your major for your BA? And why did you choose to study law as a postgrad? So those are actually two different questions. So I'll go ahead and call out that two, and we're going to go ahead and do 3 of your questions today, this patron here. First of all, BA, I didn't get a BA, I got a BS. So I'm just deeply offended that you said I got a BA. No, not really. But I actually did. I got a BS. And, BS, of course, has that unfortunate similarity to another BS. I don't think that my degree was fully BS, though. I think a lot of BS degrees actually have the virtue of being less BS than the BA degrees. My BS was titled Math Applied Science. And how did I get there? I actually did start, I guess I was getting a BA. I think they call it a BA when you go in for economics. I went in at UCLA planning to be an economics major. And as I was in the classes and starting to learn, what was the reason that I did that? First of all, I thought, well, I'm going to learn how to prove that capitalism is the best system, the best economic system, and that my economics degree and all my economics courses are going to help me to do this. And I learned both sitting in class with the various professors and what they talked about, talking with fellow students, getting into debates with fellow students, that economics alone is not going to be enough to do this, that in fact, you're going to have to bring in philosophy. So it's not that economics is going to do that. So that was one thing, so sort of the value of coming out with an economics major was not as high to me after I learned that economics wasn't exactly where it was at. At the same time, while I was at school, and when I was in college, I was a bit lost for a while. And it was, I've talked about this in prior shows, and I think also on the last Patron Q&A, I had my mother and her third husband, both were alcoholics, just bad, big time. And there was a whole lot of stuff that was going on with that at the time. I was in crew for a while, so I was really more focused on athletics, really, than being an intellectual for a while. And around that time, I was taking math, which we had to take. It was a required course anyway. And I had gotten really inspired by a professor who I had at UCLA. I had a really great professor as an undergrad at UCLA. We've got somebody else who just joined over at Zoom. So hello. Yeah, so I had this really great math professor, and he was a professor who, he taught math, and then he specialized in his research in mathematical physics. And somehow through talking with him and getting inspired and taking more math classes, I decided to switch majors, but to switch to a major that would allow me to keep credit for all of the economics courses that I had done. And I had also gone in, I transferred to UCLA. I took community college before that, and I'd taken a lot of economics classes in community college preparing for this transfer as an econ major. And so I wanted to keep all that, not spend too much time, but I wanted to switch majors over into something out of the math department. I had been really good at math as a child, and this professor was inspiring me to sort of revisit that. It turns out I'm not as great at math. Math was more of a struggle for me in college than it was when I was a child. The math for younger students is a lot easier than the math for college majors. But still, I did pretty well. And this professor had inspired me. And so then I took math, economics, kept my economics, and, continued with some of those courses, maybe the ones that applied math more to the material. And then I added physics in as well. So there was this major at UCLA, and I don't know if it's still there. It's called Math Applied Science. And the idea is that you take a bunch of math courses and that you also apply math to some other subject area. So it's an interdisciplinary major. And I chose both physics and economics. And physics was the same. I mean, I was okay at it, but I wasn't great at it. There were certain classes that came very naturally to me. I loved all the classes except for quantum mechanics. I did not like quantum mechanics, but most any physics class except quantum mechanics, I would sit in the class and be really excited and really inspired. And then sometimes with certain classes like mechanics, where I was having a hard time visualizing what was going on in a particular problem, I would have a challenge doing the homework problems. So even though I'd sit there in class and I'd be all happy and inspired and excited about the material, then I go and try to actually tackle a homework problem on my own, a physics problem, and I would have a hard time visualizing it and figuring out where are the force vectors going and how do I get started with this. I hear that's a common thing with the female brain, but I don't know if I want to use that as an excuse or not. But what I did know is that when I took thermodynamics, which didn't involve those type of force vectors and three-dimensional configurations, that I did much better. Yeah, so that's the long story. I did a BS in math applied science. And so I ended up doing quite a bit. I did really well in the economics classes, by the way. There was one economics professor that I took a few courses from, and I was able to do so well. He taught macroeconomics, and I did so well in his classes, and I guess people could see it, that they would actually hire me to help them study for their exams. So I would give little mini, sort of exam prep courses to fellow students, and they paid me something really small, like $20 or whatever. But I made a little extra money teaching to my fellow students the theories of this one kind of crazy, half crazy economics professor. So I had a good time doing it. And yeah, that was my undergraduate. So the interesting thing, I guess, is that I went on to get a graduate degree in philosophy, not having taken any philosophy courses in undergraduate, which is pretty unusual, but I did really well in the GRE exam. And then when I went to law school, I transferred to UCLA again. I was started first year at Pepperdine, transferred to UCLA. When I was at UCLA, I did take a course in the philosophy department from a professor who taught both in philosophy and law. Her name's Shauna Schifrin. And taught a philosophy of law class. I went ahead and took it and wrote a nice seminar paper for her and impressed her enough so that she ended up writing me a recommendation to get into philosophy grad. So yeah, I didn't have a BS. I didn't have a BA. I had a BS, but I still ended up being able to go into a humanities degree later. It's not as unusual to be able to go to law school having a BS. So for example, someone like me who has math or physics or both as an undergraduate can often go into law and then maybe specialize in patent law. And that is something that I thought I might do for a while. That's the next part of this question. Why did you choose to study law as a postgrad? And I went into law because obviously I care about issues in law. I care about the things that law does to us, about using ideas in philosophy to figure out what the law should be. So I cared about it substantively. And also my thinking at the time was that I probably wanted to go into some sort of academia or teaching or something that would allow me to engage in the presentation of ideas to people. And if you're going to do academia, legal academia is a way that you can handle and do research in subject matter that I care about, and at the same time do a little better financially than most academics do. The kind of the market for academia is very much affected by what alternatives exist for those academics out in the quote the real world. And you've got partners at law firms who are paid so much. And so therefore, if academia wants to pull talented people into, teaching in law schools, then what they have to do is pay them somewhat decently. So for example, the average salary for a legal academic is typically quite a lot more than it is for a philosophy professor. That was the thinking at the time. As it turns out, what do I really care about? I really care about the fundamental ideas. And so, for example, when I was teaching in law school, there was a class that I taught a few times called legal ethics. And legal ethics sounds as a title like something that is really attractive to someone like me who cares about philosophy and ethics and justice, right? It sounds very attractive. But when it actually, get down to it, what you are doing in a legal ethics course is preparing students to take a standardized test where they have to, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm talking too fast. Let me take a sip of water. Where they have to master a set of rules, very, very detailed, concrete rules. And the challenge in those courses is to motivate and to tie those rules to anything that the students care about. So, you find in legal academia, except for the philosophy of law class that I took, I also got to teach law and literature, which I really enjoyed. But maybe those are classes that I'll offer online to people at some point. That's one of the ideas that I have in my mind. Yeah. So why did I choose law? I mean, I thought maybe I could practice for a while as well, that would be an interesting thing to do. So I was interested in intellectual property law in particular. So that was one of the other factors that played into it. Okay, so those are the first two questions. Then what was your time at the Air Force Academy like? I really liked it. I really did like it a lot. There's one thing that nobody who teaches there really likes about it. If you are a person who has the idea of an academic career, one of the things that people like about having an academic career is make your own schedule-ish type of flexibility. So of course you're always on campus for office hours and for the courses that you teach. And there's sometimes administrative things and faculty meetings that you need to show up for. But other than that, you have a lot of flexibility about whether to work from home or work from school. And it's just a matter of getting your work done, your grading, your research, whatever. At the Air Force Academy, they had the rule, which, occasionally was subject to bending a little bit. And the head of our department tried to sometimes be accommodating if you had certain things you needed to do. But it was 7:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, just standard military hours. That is one thing that I didn't necessarily like. Another thing that you don't necessarily like there is that it is, bureaucratic. So there's a number of things that you think are just kind of pointless. But that kind of stuff didn't affect me so much in the department where I was in the philosophy department. We had this great colonel, he's so much fun at the head of the department. Unfortunately, he doesn't like me at all anymore because I put my ideas out there, and my ideas about just war theory and foreign policy in particular are super controversial. Of course, I'm also a fan of Edward Snowden. And so how can you be a fan of Edward Snowden and work, I guess, for the government anymore? There's all those problems, but I really enjoyed this colonel, and he seemed to tolerate me even though he disagreed with my philosophical views. I've always been completely out in the open about my philosophical views. When I applied at the Air Force Academy, it's all on my, Ayn Rand on my resume and everything else. And, when I was there, of course, when we did have a little bit of discretion in our intro ethics classes that we could include Ayn Rand in the syllabus. There was a bunch of standard things that we had to have in our syllabus as well. So I took maybe 2 classes a semester. I can't remember how much, to teach a little bit of Ayn Rand alongside Aristotle and Plato and Kant and Mill and all the just war theory stuff that we did. It was a nice syllabus. I think I also taught a little bit of Yaron Brook and Alex Epstein on just war theory during that period as well. But yeah, so I did that, and, just came there and worked hard. I often volunteered to teach the early classes. I think I'm kind of a morning person from crew. When I was in college, when I did crew, I sort of developed that. So, went ahead and did that. I was always volunteering to help out with the scheduling. the kind of person, I guess this is, there's certain types of people who think this way. If you take the GRE, they have a logic section where they just have you coordinate a massively complicated schedule with different factors, an orchestra's tour or some other thing. The scheduling of courses at the Air Force Academy with all the different rooms and the class times and the different professors and what courses they want to teach and what times they want to teach. I used to like to figure out that puzzle and put everybody in their different places. So I volunteered to do that stuff, administrative things that I would be good at. And I ended up getting promoted there too. So it was really nice to be in an environment where I knew, yeah, the people disagree with me, but we all get along and I do my work and they seem to value me. It was really nice. And when I look at certain decisions that I made, it's like maybe I could have stayed there and put up with the 7:30 to 4:30 and maybe stayed in Colorado versus coming back to California wasn't so bad. But then if I hadn't chosen to come back to California, there's other great things that wouldn't have happened. So, you can't go back and do the what ifs and everything. What else did I like about it? I liked also that the cadets and my colleagues were very well balanced in terms of valuing athletics and athletic ability as well as the intellectual. Obviously, it's a military academy, so they put a high value on maintaining fitness. And at the time, I was an avid dog agility competitor. So if I did sometimes want to go to a big competition, and I told my colleagues, I'd say, hey, I'll trade off and I'll take your class if you'll take my class on this so I can go to this national agility competition. They would switch off. And that would be something that they would understand as a value. The cadets would also find it kind of cool. In fact, there were some cadets who interviewed me about dog agility they have, like a little cadet show that they produced on campus and stuff. So I got to do that. So it just seemed to integrate a lot of things that I cared about as well. I got to teach, like I said, Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and Mill. I had gotten to the point where I had memorized Kant's categorical imperative and all the different arguments that Kant gives for it. And I could just talk for an hour and spill that lecture out and have fun with it. It was, it was fun to do. So I felt, teaching important things to people who are potentially going to be important for the future of the country, a lot of good stuff. I left it primarily for personal reasons. And, at the time I made the best decision that I could at the time, but going back, might I have stayed? Oh, there's one other thing I didn't like about it. Let me say that. One thing I didn't like about it is there's no way I could have ever done any of this when I was there. You cannot be outspoken about controversial ideas and be an employee of the federal government at the Air Force Academy. When I was writing on privacy issues, which at the time hadn't gotten super controversial yet, right? Privacy in my academic career for me has always, I've seen it as a subject that I cared about. First of all, I mean, I had been put on to privacy as a topic from Leonard Peikoff. So it wasn't like I, came to it artificially, but it just so happened that privacy is a subject where I have so much agreement with liberals. And so, I don't know how that would have played out in the Snowden era if I had stayed at the Air Force Academy and then I had been pro Snowden, right? How would that have all worked? But, so I think that's where the sympathy ends. But insofar as they're liberal at the Air Force Academy and they value privacy, that seemed to be a research subject matter where I could go out and say pretty much what I wanted and nobody there would object as well. It just happened to work out that way. It wasn't anything, like I said, I had orchestrated at the beginning. Still, even with that, what I had to do if I was going to write an op-ed in particular is I could not use my title, my academic title, when I was publishing an op-ed. So at the time, there was some op-ed about privacy and property with Google that I was publishing, and I just could only sign it as me. I couldn't use an academic title. And as you might know, if you have an academic title at an institution that's at all respected, it can help you get a lot more publication and reach for your op-eds. And so I wasn't able to do that. And that was a little bit of a hindrance to me. Of course, I love being able to just come online and say whatever I want now. Now let's see here. Okay, so I'm looking at the different chats. And welcome. There's a couple people who have joined over in the chat at Zoom. Let's see what I have in, if there's any follow-ups right now. Okay. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah. When people are going to come in and out of this, I love it. There, someone was saying, well, I might not be able to stay the whole time. I have work or whatever. Don't worry about it. I understand that sometimes people can only come in and join for a little part of the time and then leave, and then maybe they'll catch up with the rest of it later. I am not offended. If I'm easily offended, I should not be online right now in front of whoever is willing to watch, right? Okay, so that was, what was your time at the Air Force Academy like? I guess I'll go ahead and answer the next one too for this Patreon supporter, because it's one that I can answer very quickly. What has your experience been like as an objectivist in the university setting, and what is the current interest in Ayn Rand's ideas there? My experience has been mixed. I told you a bit of what it's been like at the Air Force Academy. When I then went to Chapman University, it was quite a bit more challenging. At Chapman, instead of any sort of placement decisions, faculty appointment decisions being made by, for example, I had the colonel at the Air Force Academy, and the colonel and the deputy department head both liked my work, even though they really much disagreed. They very much disagreed with my ideas. Whether I was promoted at the Air Force Academy and therefore given an offer of a 5-year position, which is sort of like tenure there, that was only up to them. Whereas at a university setting, it's up to a faculty vote. And I would think, and this happened actually at Chapman, at most schools, your faculty appointment is subject to a vote, and it's just a majority vote of the faculty. Typically, if you are a person who does your work and gets along decently with other people, even if you have controversial ideas, you have enough publications and everything, you can still get tenure or a faculty appointment or whatever it is that you're coming up for a vote for. At Chapman, their policy, which I was not aware of, or if I was, and I think I wasn't made aware of this before I made the decision to go there from Colorado. They have an appointment procedure that requires a 2/3 faculty vote. And that gets a little dicier, especially where at that time, I don't know how Chapman is now, but it was very factious. And there was a very vocal, very liberal minority that associated me with all sorts of horrible conservativeness that they disagreed with. And anyway, so that was not a good experience. And then I went to Southwestern. It was a much better, much friendlier environment. So I would say that the experience for an objectivist is mixed depending on the institutions that you go to. Good experience at the Air Force Academy, good experience at Southwestern Law, not so good of an experience at Chapman, even though there are some really great people at Chapman Law. But I think it was way too political, way too politicized there. And that's a shame. So I think just overall, for me, this has always been my policy in life, is just to be kind of out in the open about who I am and what I'm about, my ideas and everything. I was that way all through my philosophy degree. I did not hide in the closet as many academics do. I put objectivist stuff on my resume when I was applying for positions. I got my position at the Air Force Academy having done that. And you'll typically have a much better experience wherever you go if you're letting people know exactly what it is that they're getting, so it's not like you go in there. What came to mind is something that Robert Mayhew has done in the past. He talks about, you go in there and you just pretend you're a normal faculty member and that you don't have objectivism in your closet or anything like that. And then suddenly you rip off the mask and you go, haha, here, let me tell you who I really am. I never did that. I was always out in the open. I think that led for a better experience. The stuff at Chapman was probably unavoidable. And so that's that answer. Okay. So I think that's enough for that patron this time around. I have a question from another patron who she sent it on private message. Let me find it. Yeah, I've actually got a couple that were sent in the messages over at Patreon. So thank you to those of you who have done that. Okay, so here's one. She says, I sometimes struggle with this idea. Ayn Rand and objectivism claims that all individuals have free will. It's interesting you say claims, but free will is this axiomatic thing that you cannot get beneath. And I would definitely encourage you to go ahead and look at OPAR for that. So it's not just claims, but she's going to go on and she's going to talk about something that seems to contradict this. So I understand why you would use the claims language. She says, if so, is it not true to assume that parenting, education, and cultural environment are impotent in the ultimate shaping of a human mind? Is it not true that the degree of any individual's free will is somewhat determined by those influences? So she's seeing this conflict, right? She's seeing this conflict between the fact that we have free will on the one hand, and then on the other hand, that it seems that we are shaped by parenting, education, cultural environment. That if we truly did have free will in whatever sense that she's thinking of it, or at least the sense that some people think of it, that we would not be influenced by those things, that we wouldn't be shaped by those things. And I've got a few things to say. I mean, first of all, I have a huge disclaimer, which is we're getting here into very, very, basic branches of psychology about the not psychology, philosophy, the metaphysical nature of man. And this is not my specialty, although it is quite a bit of an interest to me. But I think as it should be to anybody who wants to live life according to a philosophy that they think is correct. So, but no, I'm not the specialist. We could get Onkar, we could get Greg Salmieri here talking about some of this, and it would be quite interesting and fun. So I'm going to do the best I can with it. The other thing is that there's psychology to think about as well. So I'm going to just give you the best answer that I've come up with living with these ideas and thinking about these ideas in relation to what little I've learned about psychology over the years. And a little bit from Aristotle as well came to mind when I read this question. So I'm going to give you that. My disclaimer is I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. So that being said, so free will. Yes, we have free will, but as I talked about a lot when I was encountering Jordan Peterson's ideas, there are certain things about us that can make the exercise of free will, the choice to focus on certain things and to try to implement certain decisions can make it more difficult. So Peterson's got his whole thing about the lobster, right? That, stand up straight with your shoulders back, which is hard for me to do when I'm leaning over my microphone here, right? There's certain things about us maybe that we have in common with lobsters that will either release or restrict serotonin flow in certain situations, and that can make certain things easier or harder for us to do. And these are things that if we are conscientious and we are trying to live according to a philosophy up to certain ideals that we hold, that we're going to try to recognize those things about us so that we can best exercise our free will. If you read Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about the fact that yes, and this is the way he sees it, and I believe it's correct from everything that I know, and everybody's going to have to go do their own research, and don't take my word or Aristotle's word for it. Think about it. Aristotle wrote that yes, we have free will, but it can be difficult, more difficult over time to exercise free will in the direction that you would like to do that if you've built up certain habits that contradict the thing that you're trying to do at that particular moment. So for example, if I had a friend who just posted the other day, she said, I'm about to go on a low carb diet. And she's joking. She's asking advice of those of us who are, sort of careful about carbohydrates. She says, should I just go ahead and eat all the carbs that I have in the house as a warm up to go on this low carb diet? So you get the impression that she's in the habit of eating all kinds of carbs and not thinking about it. And now she wants to change the the way that she eats. And you can imagine that, not just because of sort of psychological associations that you might have with the pleasure of eating carbohydrates, but there's a lot of physical things that go on too, that it could be hard for her to exercise her free will in this direction and change her habits around the consumption of carbohydrates. By the way, those of you who are interested in sort of the balance of carbohydrates and fats and proteins in your diet, you might do well to read Robb Wolf, Robb Wolf, Wolf. He every year posts a little summary of sort of what he does in the realms of diet and exercise and everything else. He's a paleo guru, written books. He's in fantastic shape at 46. I mean, it's just amazing. So, you know, you look at this guy and he seems happy and smart and everything else. So, you know, yeah, you would go and look and see what he does for himself. And he talks about the fact that he isn't necessarily so concerned to even restrict carbs earlier in the day as I've been doing. So if you're interested in just a different perspective on how you should handle carbs in your diet, you could look up Robb Wolf. I think he calls it My Training at 46. You can Google and find that. Anyway, going back to the woman and her trying to change her habits, it's going to be tough. And in fact, I told her it's going to be a lot tougher if you eat a whole bunch of carbs and then try to go into this carb restricted mode, right? Because you've just killed your whole insulin response and everything else. There are things that we do that build up either sort of physical states in our bodies or psychological habits in our bodies that can make the exercise of free will harder. And Aristotle also recognized this in his Ethics. How do you then handle that? Actually, let me go back before I go to the advice part of it, because she also asks about parenting, education, and cultural environment, that these have an influence on us. One of the characteristics about us and our exercise of free will is that we make decisions even when we're very young that we aren't necessarily, you know, fully even aware of making these decisions, or maybe we're aware when we're making the decisions, but we're making them with very little knowledge or context or anything else. So there are a lot of things that parents do when we're kids, and we react to them by making certain decisions about how to interpret what our parents do, how to act in reaction to what our parents are doing. And that can set up certain patterns of thinking and reaction, emotional response and behavior that later can be difficult to undo. It's like the story of all our lives, right? We're trying to undo the effect of some of the parenting. It's not that we're not making decisions, but what we're doing is we're making decisions. We're setting ourselves in the course of certain habitual responses and behaviors that we're not fully aware of. And before we know it, you know, if you take about the metaphor of a record, you know, we've put the groove in the record for so long that it can be hard to escape. That doesn't mean we don't have free will, but it's just the nature of our faculty that includes free will, that when we're very young, we're making some decisions that set habits into place before we really have the ability to know what in the world we're doing and properly evaluate things. If we're lucky, or if, you know, I don't know, maybe we put our focus in the right place. I would say a lot of it is there's so much luck early on. If you've made a half decent decision about how to deal with a, you know, screwed up parent, for example. But no, it's still shaping you. It's not a false alternative. Your parents, your education, your cultural environment, they're shaping you in the sense that they are giving you a stimulus to which you are choosing to respond in a certain way before you are fully equipped to do it. That's why parenting is so important. Proper parenting is so important. Giving children the latitude to choose a response unpressured by you in any way, shape, or form, you know, that you're letting them be them, you know, as long as they're not getting themselves into a situation where they're hurting themselves and everything else. It's very, you know, it's just crucial. Now, at the same time, from what I understand, and this is just talking to psychologists, it's not the case that you have, you know, one chance with a kid to handle a certain situation the right way. typically if it's any important sort of issue that a child is going to try to figure out and grapple with, and they're thoughtful, they'll come back to you repeatedly about it, and you can revisit and have discussions and stuff like that. So, but it's just so important for parents out there to give their kids, freedom within a very rational, very even, as peaceful as possible context, so that you don't influence the kids to, react in a certain way perhaps they feel out of survival or whatever. I'm talking about my own childhood here, right? Some of the ways that I reacted to my crappy upbringing have been hindrances to me, and to try to get out of those habits is a hard thing. So that being said, right, that I just don't see that there's a contradiction between having free will on the one hand and then having your environment influence you, particularly when you're very young. There's not a contradiction there. It's just that young kids are making decisions without either fully being aware that they're making those decisions, or maybe they're aware, but they're making it with a very limited context of knowledge. And therefore they are more likely to make some mistakes and put themselves in, a certain groove, so to speak, set up certain habits that can be hard to overcome later. It's still important. There's still some things that are open to luck a little bit. Maybe there's temperament. I don't understand psychology completely, but my impression is that what I've told you is correct. And free will is something that is axiomatic. I mean, we cannot right now have a discussion about anything where I could potentially convince you of the truth of anything, unless you have the ability to choose whether to accept my ideas or not, or to criticize them or not. The whole premise of having a discussion about ideas or philosophy or advice of any kind is that we have free will. And that's one of the things that I was criticizing Peterson about, was that he seemed to, he'd say things that seemed to undermine free will without giving, say, the qualifier that Aristotle did. Aristotle would say very clearly, yes, you have free will, but it can be harder to exercise it when you've set certain habits in place, and et cetera. But Peterson did not. Peterson would just leave you with this idea, oh my gosh, you really don't have free will. You can't fight this part of your nature. And so really the best thing you can do is use the tiny amount of free will that you have to choose to either actually have faith in God, or at least act as if you had faith in God. That was his solution. I have a very different type of solution, which would be that you don't have to choose to have faith. You can look at yourself, someone who, maybe there's certain things you don't like about yourself, you want to change. There's habits that have been set up in you either by you or, I would say it's all by you, but some of it might be you as a little child and you need to forgive the child and all that. What can you do at this stage? You're older, and sometimes it seems really, really hard to change your habits. The best person that I've seen in this regard, in terms of giving you advice about what to do to change habits, is Eben Pagan. But I'm sure Eben Pagan is just a really good presenter of ideas that he's often gathered from other people. He's excellent in that when he does that, he will always cite those other people that he's gotten the ideas from. I can't remember the different gurus that he's cited within some of his presentations, but Pagan has this idea that you should work on only one new habit at a time, that it is very hard, particularly when there's a habit that's really ingrained. It's very difficult for you to change your habits. And so the best way, if you want to do that, is to go ahead and focus on one at a time. And he has a whole program that I am, somewhat of a fan of. It's called Wake Up Productive. And his idea was that like once every month you would work on instilling a new habit, and that would be about the best that you could expect. And so then the next month you would work on instilling more. It is not an easy process, but there are things that you can do. And so what I do in my life is I figure, well, I've got only so much bandwidth, and I will take on a certain new challenge or something that I'm resistant to, kind of one at a time. And it's funny, if I go on my LinkedIn, this week, I saw that I have a work anniversary right now. You know how this works, because you put it up there. I started my show, Don't Let It Go Unheard, 7 years ago. I can't believe it's 7. So imagine, this year, 2018, is my 7-year anniversary of doing the show. And I didn't start doing video until this year. I was resistant to this whole process. And you've seen me struggle a little bit with the tech and everything. And I just get self-conscious, and I'd rather talk about the ideas than worry about the video and stuff. It's been hard, but I'm happy I'm doing it, and I'm going to keep plugging away at it and try to provide more value. And people who are patrons and supporters, I owe you guys a newsletter. I'm going to talk to you about an idea that I had about expanding my audience and increasing value that I'm delivering to you guys using the video platform. Because once you do it, and once you see, okay, I can do this, I can survive this, other ideas about what you can do start to occur to you that wouldn't have occurred to you before. Again, Peterson talks about this in his book, Jordan Peterson. I can't remember exactly how he put it. The shorthand in my mind is the Katy Perry song Firework, right? Where it's that you can open up your mind to the different possibilities only when you've made certain decisions to say, okay, what do I want to do in a particular space or direction? What is my goal? And once I accept, okay, my goal is to provide video format value, then I'm going to start having thoughts that occur to me about how to do that wouldn't have occurred to me before I got over the, doing this. But let's just get on video and try to provide some value. So I've been doing that recently. Before that, I had a bunch of things, that I was thinking about. So I always try to, knowing that I've got limited bandwidth with the various responsibilities and roles that I've got in my life, I will try to limit whatever it is that I'm working on in a particular period of time, because otherwise it won't stick. My daily habit of doing the walks and the pictures and stuff was something that I instilled for a while. Now that's very natural to me. But I was very unhealthy after a kidney surgery I had. And to get out there and increase the lengths of my walks and stuff was a huge deal. Eating more vegetables, I have to get in a better habit of that, but I'm in a pretty good groove with that. There's just little things you say, like, what can you do to improve your health, improve your efficiency, make progress in your chosen career? Usually you can only focus on one at a time. One other bit of reference I have for that, by the way, that sort of advice where you try to work on or instill one particular habit at a time, is Benjamin Franklin. He's one of the classics in the productivity space. He used to, as I understand it, keep a journal, and he had certain, I guess, virtues or characteristics that he wanted to cultivate in himself. And some of them I didn't agree with. I think humility or something was one of them. And he used to joke that he was never very good at that one, but he would give himself the assignment of focusing on a particular virtue and his exercise of it during I forget what it was, a month or whatever, that he'd focus exclusively on the one, and therefore improve his integration of that into his life. I think he started that process in his late 20s, but there's no reason that people at any age can't go ahead and instill that. But yeah, that is my advice. If I don't know if there was a looking for advice anywhere in this question, and the question as it's presented just says, isn't there a contradiction? How could you have free will on the one hand and then say that these other things influence you on the other hand? Of course you can. And, in terms of as adults, making sure that our cultural environments don't influence us unduly or in a direction that we would, if we're fully conscious, not approve of, stay in focus, right? Ron was talking about this recently about free will, and it's the decision to focus or not. And we can sense, if we're self-conscious and good about this, we can sense when we're letting ourselves potentially drift a little bit and perhaps let certain things by, when we're either choosing to judge or not judge something, or make a decision about something or not. We can be aware of those things. And it's just, to be really conscious about what you're letting in and how you're interpreting it, particularly when you know it could be important. If it's just, I'm listening to some music on the radio. It is funny how sometimes even music can affect me. I listen to a song, I'm sitting at Chipotle, and there's a song that's catching my attention for some reason. I'm looking at something else, but then suddenly the music is getting my attention. And is it just because of the catchy tune, or is there something in the lyrics that my subconscious is processing without my even knowing it? Sometimes I'll go back and I'll revisit, look at the lyrics. I wonder if that's what got my attention and I wasn't aware. So our minds are so powerful, and you can only do so much. You've only got so much bandwidth and focus and energy, but all you can do at any given moment is do the best that you can to be aware of all the different things. Are you giving into peer pressure that says that you should like Donald Trump or something? Right? Sorry, I brought Trump into this. Can you believe I brought Trump into a Patron Q A? That's pretty bad. Robert over here is commenting in the Zoom chat room. He says, each of the three influencers, nature, nurture, and choice, are undeniable and virtually self-evident. Yes. And the influence comes when you are in a state, either through youth or other things. I mean, God, you could be under the influence of drugs, maybe not even drugs that you gave to yourself, right? The women who've had the roofie experience and stuff, that can affect you. There's all kinds of things that can affect the influence of other things on you. And your goal is, like I said, to be as conscious as you can at any given time. And if you realize later that when you were young, you made certain decisions that you weren't fully conscious of, or you weren't, you didn't even just take the reins at that point when you could, and you didn't know any better. Yeah. Forgive yourself later, do the best you can now. And as I said, if you're trying to change those horrible habits that you hate, that you've ingrained in your life, pick your spots, pick the ones that are really important and focus on one at a time. That's the best advice I have from personal experience as well. There's certain habits that I felt I've had a good experience in changing, and other ones not as much. And then you have to wonder, maybe they're just not as important to me if I haven't fully changed them. And, do I need to increase their importance to me by making it real to me how important those are? Or do I need to let them go? There's all kinds of things to think about in this space. Josh makes the comment over here, influence, not dictate. Yes, the word influence. Definitely they can influence, but they don't dictate. The shaping is not dictated. Okay, so I've got another question that I want to get to over in the Patreon. Let me see. Oh, okay. So I was asked the question, have you taken the Big Five personality test? And if so, what were your scores? And this person says he's been entertaining a theory that people with certain traits may tend towards certain ideologies, especially if they're unaware. So, for example, an overly agreeable person may be prone to altruistic ethics if they haven't thought it through, and may require some form of utilitarian band-aid to accept individualism. I did end up taking a Big Five, and I don't know exactly which of the ones you're looking for. I think I'm a fairly agreeable person, and I haven't. Are you going to be prone to altruistic ethics, or is it some other psychological thing that you're more prone to? Because you can have a conflict between those, even, right? So there's things that could be in your psychology that might actually contradict your explicit ethics. So he's curious about this. I did take it. I don't have my results on that handy, and it's not really something like, for instance, there's one survey that was being passed around Facebook, and I went ahead and took it, and I shared it with a limited audience of, kind of closer friends on Facebook. And there's this graph that kind of shows where you are with respect to the Big Five and everything. And I went ahead and, but I don't know that I would actually put that out there so much publicly. With respect to agreeableness, for example, though, I think I was fairly high on agreeableness. I wasn't overly agreeable, but, open, fairly open and stuff. And yet I haven't gone towards altruism. I would not always confuse psychology with philosophy either. That kind of goes back to the other question, right? This issue of habits, that there are certain psychological habits of thinking that you may have built up that might contradict your explicit philosophy. And that's the challenge that a lot of people have had. And that's where I've talked about in the past, that we need more than just philosophy in order to live this life. We also need, unfortunately, I tend to agree with you on that psychology is at a fairly young state. And so, little psychology could be a dangerous thing in a certain way, but there's some basic knowledge of psychology just to have some very basic awareness of certain issues that can help you at least try to navigate a lot of this. Maybe we'll do some, examination on my show in the future more about changing habits, kind of the latest science of habits. I've been looking at some of the work of Gina Gorlin, and I've been interested to kind of look at her and see what she's got in terms of the changing of habits. Deutsch is I think someone who's written on that as well. We'll take a look. There's one more question I want to get. I've got just a few more minutes in the time that I've allotted for this today. And it is on the post. Again, join over at Patreon. I would love to have you guys, any of you who are watching, join me next time. I've got one patron who added a question. Oh, is torture a valid option during war? This was posted by a patron over at Patreon. And let me give you just a quick answer on this one. War, when you think about just war theory, I subscribe 100% to the standard that Yaron Brook, Alex Epstein, when he was writing with Yaron Brook, and then Alain Journo, all of them have talked about this particular standard about what is just during war, that in the pursuit of American self-interest, American rational self-interest, we are at a time of war, again, at a time of war, which, somebody has initiated force against us. There is a physical threat against Americans, that we are justified in doing whatever is necessary to eliminate the risk with minimal loss of life on our side. Now, in my opinion, that could include torture. It's a valid option, but I would say there are a number of reasons why you would want to avoid torture. One is it's of dubious effectiveness, as far as I understand from the studies, and you'd have to go look at the studies to verify this, but it's dubious in terms of whether it's actually going to yield you any value. Is it going to give you, for instance, the information that you need to stop the next imminent terrorist attack? It may or may not. Now, another thing to think about is what it's going to do in terms of your, sort of reputation around the world. Do you really want to be a power that resorts to torture except as an extreme last resort? Then the other thing is, who is going to be inflicting this torture, and what would inflicting the torture do to that person? If I had to actually inflict torture, I can imagine a certain scenario in which I would do it. I'd be Jack Bauer on 24 and do all those horrible things that you watch Jack Bauer do. Very certain limited scenarios where I would do that. But I mean, you've got to know that you have somebody who's an agent of the enemy, who's, as far as you know, has a really good chance of having the knowledge that you need to stop this imminent attack, and you can't get the information in the time that you need to anyway else. And this is a last resort, and that, you're prepared to accept the reputational costs and the psychological costs and everything else. So yeah, a valid option, something that I would be eager, it's like abortion. I just thought of that as the analogy. I'm for the right of a woman to get an abortion. Would I ever want to get an abortion? No. Would I ever wish that for anybody? No. Do I think, that when these right-wing politicians talk about, they have I guess a Planned Parenthood at a strip mall or whatever, and they sit there and they make jokes about the woman's going to go get a latte and then grab an abortion as if it's nothing or whatever. It is ridiculous to think that this is good. Yeah, a valid option, one that you would want to have there, and one that I do think in a time of war is validly there, because, again, you can do whatever is necessary to eliminate the risk with minimal loss of life on your side. But you have to know that that person that you're torturing is someone who is, an enemy agent, somebody who's been actively engaged in the threat to destroy you. And they've got the knowledge. And like I said, you're prepared to accept the cost, because everything's got a cost. And I just could not I couldn't imagine being that person who has to torture. So I hope that that is an answer. Let me zoom over, because I've got the Zoom chat. Anybody in the Zoom chat have more of a follow-up on any of that? Oh, sorry about that. I got some crazy phone call. Yeah, I have a dog bark ring to my phone that you guys just heard. Someone over in the chat at YouTube says, please keep doing videos. Besides the interesting banter, you're nice to look at. Thank you. I mean, that kind of thing makes me a little less self-conscious about this process. At the same time, obviously, I want to provide a lot more value than that. In particular, I'm going to get older, and I want to continue to provide value as I get older. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Questions? Yeah. Quantum mechanics is not even real science, just engineering rules of thumb. My quantum mechanics professor just made it unintelligible to me. And maybe that's a virtue, that I could not understand it as well as I could understand thermodynamics or mechanics. Both of those classes, I loved sitting in those classes and hearing those lectures. I got a question about whether I had a chance to read a book about a theory of objectivist parenting. I have not. I am not an expert on parenting in any way. I wish I'd had better parenting that I could talk about. Let's see. And again, this Superfin guy he's over. That's an interesting moniker over at YouTube. He says the important thing about free will is to make a decision. If there are obstacles in the way, is a different thing. There are times that it is a lot easier. So if you notice, for example, and this is another aspect of Eben Pagan's program that I should have mentioned. Have you noticed if you're in the evening time, that it is a lot harder to do the things that you're supposed to do? So for example, if you've got a really good habit built up of flossing and brushing your teeth right before you go to bed, you might put off going to bed because you're so tired that the prospect of flossing and brushing your teeth just seems like so much darn work. And you won't let yourself go to bed without doing that. It's that. You've had that experience, right? You've had that experience. It's not just about making the decision or knowing what is right for you. It's about executing. And I think Aristotle had it exactly right, that just sometimes it's hard to exercise your free will in the face of certain habits. So the stuff that he used to talk about were virtues like honesty. If you have a habit of being honest, then you're not going to, suppose you go to a grocery checkout, supermarket checkout, and at the supermarket checkout, they give you too much change. You've given them a 20 and then they end up giving you 20 something back or whatever. You end up you wouldn't even paid for your coffee, say. Then you're going to just give it right back. I mean, there's not going to be any hesitance at all, because this is just your habit. You're always this honest person. Whereas if you don't have that habit built up, this was like I said, I think this is an example that I remember from Nicomachean Ethics, that you would have a hard time doing it, exercising that free will. So those are the two concretes that I can give you. But as I said, you may have viscerally experienced the one about putting off going to bed because you feel too lazy to do the things that you feel like you need to do before you go to bed, because you've built up a habit around those. It can get that difficult, even with a firmly established habit. Okay, everyone. So I think that's it for today. I've gone a little bit over the hour that I've intended. I thank you for joining me. Those of you who have joined me live over on YouTube, hello. Particular thank you to those of you who are joining me over on Zoom. Not only have you guys been helping to support my show and got in at the ground floor over on the Patreon page, but now you're taking time out of your life on your Friday to join me live. So I appreciate that too. Everybody who wants to get in on the next Q&A and submit questions, join me over on Patreon. And as I said, if you are watching me on YouTube at all and you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe, because I would very much like to avail myself of the features of YouTube that they unlock only when I reach 1,000 subscribers and a certain number of hours of views. If you could help me do that. If you've enjoyed this and you want to share it around from YouTube, I do appreciate that. I don't mind if you do that. That was a mashup, that sentence right there. It was a mashup between I don't mind if you do that and I do appreciate if you do that. So I said I don't appreciate. I'm tired. Got to go. Everybody, I'll talk to you next time. First, I'm going to, I guess, just end my Zoom meeting. It'll turn off for everybody, right? Take care. Thank you.